This design for the Golden Dome will integrate with our existing defense capabilities and should be fully operational before the end of my term.
The most powerful missile defense system is capable of intercepting intercontinental ballistic missiles, hypersonic missiles, and missiles equipped with nuclear warheads at the early stages of their flight, before the missile has even gained speed. Moreover, many systems of this missile defense will operate specifically in space, and most likely it is there in space that these missiles will be intercepted. The company that will most likely be producing this system shows in its promotional video that the missiles will be intercepted in such a way that Americans won't even notice that anything has happened anywhere. Only a handful of people will know about this.
Watchtower Looking Glass System has confirmed intercept.
It sounds fantastic, but that's exactly what the project of American President Donald Trump called Golden Dome is supposed to look like. In fact, the new missile defense system Golden Dome, which is being developed by America, will be conceptually similar to the Strategic Defense Initiative program, which was presented in 1983 by Donald Trump's fellow Republican Ronald Reagan. However, what Reagan failed to achieve, Trump might succeed in. Well, at least that's what they believe in his administration. The idea underlying both programs is quite simple. You need to start intercepting intercontinental ballistic missiles at an early stage of their flight while their engine is running and its flame is clearly visible. Well, and the missile itself has not yet gained speed, or at the mid-course stage during its flight in space. The most convenient way to do this is to place interceptors in Earth's orbit, and it is precisely there in space that this war should be fought. The idea is certainly impressive, but Donald Trump's plans sound questionable, and these are not my conclusions. These are the conclusions of many experts who say that Donald Trump's promises to build such a system in 3 years are very, very doubtful. Plus, the expenses that would have to be the basis of this program are also quite high. But on the other hand, experts add that America still needs such a system. Because the missile defense system that exists now is, to put it mildly, morally outdated. My name is Alexei Pechi. Let's figure out in this episode what the Golden Dome project is, what is being invested in it, and how it will work. Will Donald Trump's administration be able to implement this project, or will it remain just like Ronald Reagan's project? And most importantly, what exactly will this system actually protect against, and from whom will it protect America? Before we begin, I ask you to like this episode, leave your comment, and subscribe to this channel. Also, please subscribe to my Telegram channel. The link to it is in the description of this video. There I post up-to-date news as soon as it comes in. Well, now let's move on to the Golden Dome project. So on the eve, American President Donald Trump promised Americans that in just 3 years, the newest modern missile defense system over America called the Golden Dome would be created. And supposedly this system will protect all of America from any type of weapon, and it will most likely operate in space. And Americans simply won't even notice if someone launches a missile at America, because this system will intercept it. And as I already mentioned earlier, this new system, the Golden Dome, which America is currently developing, is conceptually similar to Ronald Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative program. But back in the 1980s, it was not possible to implement this program because the technology was not advanced enough. Because that very Strategic Defense Initiative at the time envisioned rather exotic systems, atomic lasers, beam weapons, and many, many other things. And even kinetic munitions, projectiles that destroy targets by ramming into them. They had a bizarre umbrella-like shape, so at that time it seemed like something out of science fiction. Now, as they are convinced in the Pentagon and the Trump administration, first, technology has advanced far ahead, and second, the concept has become simpler. The peculiarity of the new program is that it exists as a conceptual design, and many of the technologies for it have not yet been created. This means that it will most likely take a long time to implement, the deadlines will probably be pushed back, the cost will increase, and it will be very difficult to predict the final price. In fact, this program has already been in development for several years. Some existing components of the United States missile defense system will also be integrated into it. At the very least, to intercept what the new space-based component of the missile defense system might miss. The main focus of this system is on satellites. The principle of operation of the new missile defense system was described back during the first presidential term of Donald Trump, when in 2019 the United States Department of Defense published a review of missile defense policy. It stated that a network of spacecraft would be deployed in space, which would serve as a missile launch warning system. It is also planned to deploy interceptors in space, which are supposed to intercept these missiles, also there already in 2019 year. It was about the system destroying missiles during the boost phase of their trajectory using both kinetic and non-kinetic means, such as lasers. This became possible after the emergence of inexpensive low-orbit satellites, which can be launched into space in simply enormous quantities. In this way, it is possible to create a network of spacecraft that can also track missile launches. In addition to new technologies that have greatly reduced the cost of creating spacecraft, new opportunities for launching them into orbit have appeared with the advent of reusable rockets, the cost of which has decreased very significantly. So far it looks pretty simple, but the difficulty here is that not only will satellites for remote sensing of the Earth be needed, which will monitor objects on the ground, such as submarines or mobile launchers, but also satellites that will track intercontinental ballistic missiles during flight. Provide targeting for the interceptors. Let's move on to the interceptors. A kinetic interceptor is a missile that destroys its target by colliding with it at full speed. Since we're talking about really high speeds, much greater than the speed of sound, the impact will be strong enough and the kinetic energy released will be sufficient to actually destroy the target. This is how, for example, the PAC-3 missile of the Patriot system works. However, as you can imagine, it would be difficult to launch such a system into orbit. One missile of this family weighs more than 300 kilograms, and together with the launch container, it's much heavier. Physically launching a missile into orbit is extremely challenging. To hit a target, you need a lot more missiles than just one. And purely mathematically, considering that they will have to be placed over a very large area, it will be very difficult to get around this problem. Meanwhile, as experts now claim, the United States is already capable of building kinetic interceptor missiles for deployment in space, each weighing 80 kilograms. Well, as stated, for example, by the director of the United States Space Development Agency and former head of the Office of Tactical Technology, Fred Kennedy, quote, "Place 6 interceptors in the orbital equivalent of a multiple launch rocket system's launcher magazine and attach this to a small satellite in its nose section. Launch 21 such carriers on a single Rocket 9 or a similar competitor's rocket. Repeat this 13 times, and you will get 273 carrier interceptors, each carrying almost 1,700 individually targeted interceptors. Each carrier with 6 interceptors can weigh only about 750 kilograms. That's about the same as the weight of a second-generation satellite. That is, he clearly says that this is feasible and quite realistic. On the other hand, as other experts note, since the interceptors will also be in low orbit, they will have a smaller range and very little time to hit their targets. So in fact, there will literally be just minutes, or rather very few minutes, depending on how quickly the rocket's fuel burns out. If you want to cover an area the size of, say, North Korea and all possible launch positions, you will still need hundreds and hundreds of interceptor satellites. Russia's number is, of course, significantly greater. As for the price, Trump stated this Tuesday that the program will require an initial investment of $25 billion and its total cost over time will amount to $175 billion. The initial $25 billion, according to him, is already provided for in his project called One Big Beautiful Tax Bill. This is currently being passed with great difficulty in the United States Congress. $75 billion is the preliminary official estimate of the program's cost. But the Congressional Budget Office of the United States calculated that the space component alone of the Golden Dome could cost $524 billion over the next 20 years. But even this preliminary amount may turn out to be significantly less than the final total, since many systems still have yet to be developed. They simply do not exist yet. But even if we hypothetically assume that such a system will be developed and actually implemented, another question arises here. The thing is, the missile defense system proposed by Donald Trump will likely disrupt the existing system of strategic nuclear deterrence. This is a strategy in which the possession of nuclear weapons serves as a means of preventing an attack from a potential adversary. The main principle is guaranteed mutual destruction. If one side launches a nuclear strike, the other will be able to respond with such devastating force that the cost of aggression becomes unacceptable. Well, for decades this kept the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics and the United States of America, the largest nuclear powers, from nuclear war. And this absence of war based on nuclear deterrence is called strategic stability. This stability was ensured by nuclear deterrence, the easing of tensions, and the warming of relations between the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, later Russia, and the United States of America. And this stability is disrupted by other factors, including the war that Russia is waging against Ukraine and the emergence of new types of strategic weapons. For instance, the ones Russian dictator Vladimir Putin mentioned in 2018. And here an interesting point arises. The thing is that during the Cold War, missile defense programs were considered one of the destabilizing factors for international stability. Let me explain why. The thing is, a country that possesses an effective missile defense system might want to be the first to launch a disarming nuclear strike, counting on the fact that the retaliatory strike simply won't get through that very missile defense system. And the opponent will also strive to strike first in order to neutralize the advantage of the defense. Accordingly, there arises the hypothetical threat that the Americans, we're just reasoning here, the Americans will be confident that any rusty old intercontinental ballistic missile won't break through their defense. Accordingly, they can boldly strike the other side. And, accordingly, this principle of mutual destruction no longer works. The Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, signed in 1972 and in effect until 2002, was precisely intended to eliminate these threats. The countries pledged not to substantially expand their missile defense systems. However, the current situation in nuclear deterrence is different from what it was in the 70s and 80s of the last century. The world has become more multipolar, and accordingly, the nuclear club has also grown. Well, at least one of the countries possessing a nuclear arsenal, China, has also become a subject of nuclear deterrence. This became one of the reasons for the collapse of the system of bilateral treaties that ensured stability. Among them, in particular, were treaties on the limitation of missile defense, and an agreement called Open Skies. In the year 2023, Russia also suspended its participation in the new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty. As you can see, we are entering a new arms race era, reminiscent of the Cold War period. That same Russia will probably try to respond to the developments of the Iron Dome program, and there are quite a few opportunities for this. First of all, Russia can increase the number of intercontinental ballistic missiles. Russia was previously restricted by the now suspended Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, and no matter how many interceptors are deployed in space, each additional missile will require a significant increase in their number. So, the more missiles Russia has, the more interceptors America needs to launch into space. It simply turns into a race. Who has more interceptors or who has more missiles? None of the existing missile defense systems in the world are capable of repelling a massive nuclear strike. So it is logical to assume that Russia will primarily try to increase the number of delivery systems. Since we're talking about the initial stage of intercepting this missile, it's possible to build not only missiles with nuclear warheads, but also decoys. There will be very little time to identify them. Accordingly, America will spend its interceptors in space on this, but these will just be dummies. Secondly, Russia can respond asymmetrically by developing non-ballistic delivery systems. And here many Western experts recall that in 2018, Putin already demonstrated computer graphics. With projects like the Poseidon nuclear torpedo or the Burevestnik cruise missile with a nuclear engine. Well, finally, Russia may start improving its existing missiles by enhancing their missile defense penetration systems. Actually, these systems do not operate during the boost phase of the trajectory. At that moment, the missile is just gaining altitude and speed without performing any maneuvers. And now the Americans are trying to reach a level where these missiles can be destroyed precisely at this stage. But in any case, retaliatory measures from Russia or China will require significant financial investments. Since Trump is rushing to implement the missile defense program, urgent measures must also be taken. The truth is, right now, Russia is not in the best position for such large-scale developments. Moscow is still waging a major war against Ukraine, which requires significant expenditures, and any nuclear program is a very, very expensive undertaking. The unsuccessful program, as it was called, Ronald Reagan's Star Wars, although it was never implemented, nevertheless played a major role in the confrontation with the Soviet Union. It forced the Soviet Union to enter an arms race, which became one of the reasons for the collapse of the Soviet Union. Therefore, it is possible that the goal now is exactly the same. An arms race is starting, which Russia simply cannot handle, neither financially nor physically, and at some point it will just start to fall apart, at least economically. But here a logical question arises. Will the United States of America be able to handle the implementation of this project financially and within the given time frame? The thing is, experts are already scratching their heads over President Trump's ambitious 3-year timeline for creating the Golden Dome, next-generation missile defense systems which, according to him, are crucial for the future security of the United States. The Golden Dome, designed to protect the skies over the continental United States, would mark a truly bold step into space, promising a network of space-based missiles launched from satellites to intercept missiles launched from Earth. But the expensive, unproven technology is still waiting to be deployed for years. And so, according to many experts, it was Donald Trump who called for the creation of this system by executive order in January, and accordingly stated that, as he said, it would take 2.5 to 3 years to implement this project. And he stated that this system would be launched before he leaves the White House. But Donald Trump's statements that the system could be completed in 3 years seem exaggerated, considering the huge number of satellites required to cover and protect the entire territory of the United States. Through missile detection and tracking, as experts have calculated, such a system would need from 400 to more than 1,000 satellites. Plus, another 200 attack satellites armed with missiles or lasers would need to be built to shoot down enemy weapons. And this will be the first time such weapons are deployed in space, but this technology has not yet been demonstrated. But besides satellites, there are 2 more components of this system that also need to be implemented, and fairly quickly. This is a sharp increase in the production of the latest munitions and missiles, which will be used to shoot down enemy targets in space. Plus, radars and sensors are needed to detect and track fast-moving hypersonic missiles in space. Although funding for these components has been partially completed, and at least the implementation of many of them may begin within 3 years, the system's need for space interceptors will become a difficult challenge. And many say that in 3 years, unfortunately, America is unlikely to have those very space interceptors, because this is a very complex and expensive problem to solve. But if the United States starts acting quickly, they can achieve significant progress in acquiring missiles, radars, and satellite constellations during this period of time allotted by Trump. Plus, the supposed cost of $175 billion, which Trump also announced this Tuesday, is being called into question. But here's where it gets really interesting. In terms of financing, Donald Trump says that $175 billion are needed to implement this project. Congress says that more than $500 billion are needed, but in fact, no funds have been allocated yet. There are $25 billion provided for, which are included in Trump's bill that is currently being voted on in Congress. But even if we hypothetically assume that this bill is passed, we only have $25 billion for the implementation of this program. How it will be funded beyond these initial amounts is unknown. Well, according to experts, if Zolotoy Kupol does not have broad political support, the system will most likely cease to exist in 3 years. And for Republicans who support the concept of Zolotoy Kupol, it would be wise to reach out to other parties, to the Democrats, and secure the support of the Democratic Party to prevent this project from collapsing. When, for example, in 3 years Trump leaves the White House and the Democrats come to power, and they say that this is just money thrown to the wind. For these efforts to succeed, constant funding and attention will be required, extending beyond the next 1 or even 2 election cycles. Other experts warn that United States adversaries may face the threat from the Iron Dome and will try to create their own similar space systems or develop weapons capable of bypassing this missile defense shield. And now a representative of the Chinese Foreign Ministry has already stated that Putin is seriously concerned about the Iron Dome project and has called on Washington to abandon this project. Next, I will quote Mao Ning, the spokeswoman of the Chinese Foreign Ministry. The United States, in pursuing its policy, is primarily driven by an obsession with absolute security for itself. This violates the principle that the security of all countries should not be threatened and undermines global strategic balance and stability. China is seriously concerned about this. Member of the House of Representatives Sen Moulton, a Democrat, raised this issue with senior officials in the United States Armed Forces missile defense earlier this month. It should be noted that Russia and China have publicly expressed concern about the United States missile defense system. Quote, "You are going to spend billions of taxpayer dollars to create things that might inspire Russians to say, 'Oh, we need to take them out of service before they are used.' You'd better take this into account if you're going to spend a lot of taxpayer money on it." The system also faces a potential obstacle due to the ongoing struggle for government-controlled wireless frequencies. The bill includes language that would allow the United States government to auction off spectrum controlled by the federal government. These are electromagnetic radio waves that the Pentagon uses for its radars, missile defense, and secure communications. And here, according to the Republicans, the sale of these frequencies to commercial telecommunications companies is expected to raise $88 billion to fund the tax and spending changes planned by Trump. But this could interfere with the construction of the Golden Dome because then many of the frequencies would be owned by private companies. And this could seriously disrupt the operation of this Golden Dome in terms of detection and interception. And that's exactly it. Katie Arrington, Acting Director of Information Technology at the Pentagon, told lawmakers earlier this month, testifying that the Golden Dome will not work if the United States Department of Defense does not control the 3 GHz radio frequency range used for radars and missile defense systems. As she stated, this is critically important for national security. The only way we can achieve the Golden Dome right now is to have the lower 3 from the spectrum. Well, and moving on, she reported that the Army is equipped with about 1,100 different platforms and weapon systems for national security defense in this spectrum. These are valuable critical capabilities that we cannot afford to lose. This is the golden area of the spectrum and we need to protect it to maintain national security. But the Republicans' bill proposes to simply transfer some of these frequencies to private telecommunications companies. Like, let them use it, and in return they'll bring in $88 billion. The Pentagon says this should never happen as it's extremely dangerous. In general, there are a lot of obstacles on the way to implementing this project, but one conclusion can be drawn. We are on the threshold of a new era of mass rearmament and a global arms race, which in principle could repeat the history of the Cold War, when the Soviet Union simply collapsed because it could no longer financially sustain this race. But I will leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode, subscribe to the channel, click the bell, and don't forget to like.